6 days before I was supposed to hand over power of attorney to my son-in-law, the woman cutting my hair set down her scissors, leaned close to the mirror and said very quietly, "Don't react, just listen. The man who was in here an hour ago, I know his fists." I had been coming to Patrice's salon on Dunmore Street for 14 years, since before my husband got sick, since before the funeral, the paperwork, the long year afterward when I barely left the house. Patrice Hollins had cut my hair the week we buried Wendell, and every 6 weeks since, and she knew things about my life that I had never told anyone directly. The way you tell things to someone whose hands are in your hair and whose eyes meet yours in a mirror. The salon was quiet that Tuesday afternoon. One other client under the dryer in the back, the radio low, the smell of tint and talcum powder that I associated with every ordinary Tuesday of the past decade. Patrice was doing my color first, then the cut, the same order we always did it. She had just started sectioning when she went still. "His name," she said, barely moving her lips, "is Gerald Foss. He came in this morning with a woman, younger, maybe 40. They sat in the waiting area for 20 minutes before I told them I didn't have walk-in appointments." She paused, rinsed the brush, kept working. "They didn't know I could hear them." I looked at her in the mirror. The woman said, and I'm going to say this exactly, she said, "By the time the assessment clears, the transfer will already be on record. She won't have standing to contest it without proving fraud, and at her age with what we've documented that won't be possible." Patrice set the brush down. Her voice was steady, but her jaw was tight. Then the man said Sutton has the notary lined up for the 15th, and the woman said, "Good. Keep him away from her until then." I did not move. Sutton, my son-in-law, Sutton Graff, who had been married to my daughter for 9 years, who called me by my first name because I had asked him to, who had sat across from me at my kitchen table 4 months ago and explained, with charts, why giving him power of attorney over my estate was the most sensible way to protect what Wendell and I had built. "Do you know who the woman was?" I asked. Patrice shook her head. "Blonde, professional clothes." She did most of the talking. I looked at my own face in the mirror. 68 years old, retired pharmacist, 31 years at the same hospital in Harlan County, Kentucky before Wendell's illness brought us back to Cloverfield, Tennessee, where he had grown up and where I had agreed to spend the last chapter of our lives. I knew drug interactions and dosage thresholds and exactly which questions to ask when someone was trying to move fast through paperwork they didn't want you to read carefully. "Gerald Foss," I said.
"Can you spell that?"
She did. I wrote it on the back of a receipt from my purse. Patrice finished my hair in near silence. When she turned the chair so I could see the back, I noticed that her hands were not quite steady. She had heard something that frightened her and she had waited for me. I thought about what that cost a person, the sitting with something like that, the deciding whether to speak. I paid and tipped her and stood at the door for a moment. "You did the right thing," I said. "You take care of yourself," she said. She meant it the way people mean it when they're actually worried. I drove home on the long route through the center of Cloverfield, past the library and the hardware store and the Methodist church where Wendell's funeral had been. The October light was thin and gold and made everything look like a photograph of itself. I drove slowly and I thought, Wendell had died 14 months ago. He had been sick for 3 years before that, and the illness had been the kind that took things gradually. His mobility first, then his voice, then finally everything else. I had nursed him through all of it, the way I had been trained to care for people and the way I had loved him for 42 years. When it was over, I was exhausted in a way that had no name, and I had stayed very close to home for a long time. My daughter, Celeste, lived 40 minutes away in Briarton. She called twice a week. She was a good person, careful and warm, the kind of woman who remembered to ask about things you mentioned in passing months before. Sutton was different. Sutton was efficient. Sutton managed things. In the 18 months since Wendell's diagnosis became terminal, Sutton had appointed himself the manager of our family's practical concerns, and I had let him because I was tired, and because Celeste trusted him, and because grief makes it very easy to let someone else carry the folders. I pulled into my driveway and sat with the engine off. The house was a craftsman bungalow on the east side of Cloverfield, the one Wendell and I had bought when we came back, with a front porch and a yard that backed up to a stand of white oaks that turned a color in October I had never seen anywhere else. We had spent 8 years in this house. It was the last Wendell had been alive, power of attorney. Sutton had presented it as estate planning, protecting my assets from probate, from tax exposure, from what he called the vulnerabilities that come with living alone at your stage. He had used that phrase, your stage, in the same tone a doctor uses when they want to soften they don't think you're going to hear directly. I had signed nothing yet. I was scheduled to sign on the 15th. I went inside and stood in the kitchen for a long time before I did anything. Then I called my friend Roberta. Roberta Finch had been my closest friend for 27 years. We had worked the same floor at the hospital for a decade before she moved to Briarton and opened a home health practice. She was 71, sharp as January, and when I told her what Patrice had told me, she listened without interrupting, which was harder for her than it was for most people and which told me she understood the gravity. She said, "You need Hal Demarest." Hal Demarest was the attorney who had handled Wendell's estate. 63 years old, wore the same kind of reading glasses Wendell had worn, had spent 15 years in elder law before going into general practice. He returned my call within 45 minutes of my leaving a message. I told him everything. Patrice's account word for word, Sutton's name, the date of the 15th, the name Gerald Foss. Hal was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't sign anything. Don't let Sutton know that anything has changed. Come to my office tomorrow morning and bring every document he's given you." Slept in the armchair in the living room that night because I could not make myself go upstairs. I had a folder on the end table. Sutton had given it to me 6 weeks ago and I had read it twice without fully understanding the fee provisions. I read it again that night with a legal pad and a highlighter and I understood it differently than I had before. Section 7, paragraph 3. Subsection C, the advisory and management compensation language. The part that said the designated power of attorney holder was entitled to a reasonable fee for services rendered in managing estate assets, with reasonable defined by reference to a schedule in an attached exhibit. The attached exhibit was 4 pages of small print that established an annual rate of 3% of total managed assets. Wendell and I had built what we had built over 42 years of working and saving. The house was worth $280,000. The retirement accounts were $390,000. The savings were another $60,000. All of it, everything, was described in the document Sutton had given me as assets under management. 3% annually was approximately $22,000 a year in fees, payable to Sutton. I had not noticed that the first 2 times I read it. I sat in the dark with the folder in my lap and thought about the word documented in what the woman at Patrice's salon had said. Sutton has documentation. I thought about a conversation in June when I had told Sutton I was struggling to keep track of which bills I had already paid. I thought about a Sunday in August when I stood in the grocery store parking lot for 5 minutes because I could not remember briefly which car was mine. Small moments. Moments I had attributed to grief and fatigue and the disorientation of living alone for the first time in 40 years. Moments I had mentioned to Sutton because he had asked carefully and warmly how I was really managing. I thought about who had been taking notes. Hal Demarest's office was above the old savings and loan building downtown, up a flight of stairs that still had the original wood banister. He met me at the top in his reading glasses with coffee already poured. He read the folder slowly, all of it, section by section, turning back to reread things the way careful people do. When he finished, he set it on the desk and tapped section 7 with one finger. "This fee structure," he said. "Did Sutton walk you through this in your meeting?" "He mentioned fees. He said they were standard. He did not specify the amount?" "No." Hall turned to page 9. "This clause designates Sutton as sole signatory authority over any transaction exceeding $5,000. That means if you needed to access your own savings account for a medical emergency or a home repair, he would have to authorize it." He looked at me over his glasses. "Did he explain that?" "He said there were certain thresholds for co-approval. He said it was for my protection." Hal set down his pen. "Tell me about the assessment." I told him what I had heard through Patrice, the mention of documentation, the assessment that was supposed to clear before the transfer. He was quiet for a long moment. "Who have you told about cognitive difficulties? Any moments of confusion, memory concerns?" I thought about it. Honestly, Sutton. My daughter through Sutton, because she had mentioned in September that Sutton had said he was worried about me. My doctor in a routine appointment in July when she asked the standard questions and I had mentioned the parking lot and the bills. She had said it was consistent with grief response. Nothing to be alarmed about. "Who else was in those conversations?" Hal asked. "Sutton was at the July appointment. He drove me. I didn't ask him to come in, but the nurse said he had asked if he could and I said yes." Hal picked up his pen and wrote something. "Someone has been building a record," he said, "not to protect you." He stood and went to his bookshelf and came back with a blue binder. "Tennessee Elder Financial Abuse. Felony classification when assets exceed $1,000. Fraudulent documentation supporting capacity challenges carries its own charges." He paused. "But I need more than what you overheard to build a case. I need to know who Gerald Foss is and what role he plays." He wrote a name on a notepad, Cecily Marsh. She was an investigator with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation for 18 years. Financial crimes, elder fraud. He slid the paper across the desk. "She's not cheap. She's worth it." What about the 15th? I asked. You're going to call Sutton tonight and tell him you need to postpone. Tell him your back has been bothering you. A small complaint, nothing alarming. Tell him you'd rather wait until you're feeling better to sit through the paperwork. He paused. You have 10 days. I drove home through Cloverfield, past the pharmacy where I had picked up Wendell's prescriptions every 2 weeks for 3 years, past the park where we had walked on Sundays when he was still strong enough to walk. I called Sutton at 4 o'clock. His voice was the voice it always was, warm, measured, slightly careful in the way of someone who has decided how to manage a conversation before it begins. I told him my back had flared up. He said, of course, no rush, please rest. He said Celeste had been worried about me. He said, we just want to make sure everything is settled, you know? For your peace of mind. Thank you. I sat holding the phone after we hung up and thought about my daughter. Celeste did not know what her husband was doing. I was as certain of that as I was of my own name. She was the reason he had gotten this far. She was the door he had walked through. Cecily Marsh came to my house the following morning carrying a canvas bag that looked like it belonged to someone's grandmother and had the eyes of a woman who had spent 2 decades listening to people lie. She was 62, comfortable looking, and she asked good questions. When I finished telling her everything, she asked one more. Your son-in-law, is he the origin of this, do you think? Or is he following someone's lead? I thought about Sutton's face at my kitchen table the night he had presented the folder, his confidence, the way he had moved through the document as though he had rehearsed the presentation but not written the material. I don't know, I said. I think he may understand more than he admits and less than he believes. Cecily nodded. That's a careful answer. It's probably the right one. She left with copies of every document. She said she would contact me within 4 days. Roberta came that evening and we sat at the kitchen table and went through everything Sutton had given me in chronological order. The first consultation summary in March, the initial trust outline in May, the power of attorney draft in August, the revised version in September, the final document with the signing date in October. 7 months of patient, incremental construction. Each document slightly more complex than the last. Each one building on the one before it, the way you build a case for something you want a person to agree to before they understand the full scope of what they're agreeing to. Roberta said, he had access to your grief, he used it. On the 3rd day, Cecily called. She came back the following morning and this time she asked me to have my attorney present. Hal sat across from her at my kitchen table. She opened her bag and produced 2 folders and a manila envelope. The first folder was Gerald Foss. He was a licensed notary and document specialist in Knox County. He had been named in a complaint filed with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance in 2020, involving a trust arrangement that had transferred 60% of an elderly widow's assets into a management structure controlled by a family member's designated agent. The complaint had been settled quietly. The widow had died the following year. Her family, meaning the family members who had not been party to the arrangement, had contested the estate and lost. Cecily tapped the folder. Foss notarizes documents for people who need paperwork witnessed quickly and without questions. He's done it at least 4 times in the past 6 years with similar arrangements. The second folder was the woman from Patrice's salon. Her name was Dara Kellum. She was a paralegal who had worked at an estate planning firm in Nashville until 2019 when she had left. Cecily chose her words deliberately, under circumstances that included questions about her handling of client documents. Nothing prosecuted. She had since worked as an independent consultant for several clients, including, as of February of this year, Sutton Graff. Hal leaned forward. Sutton hired her? As a document preparation consultant, Cecily said. She drafted the power of attorney documents. She structured the fee provisions. She connected Sutton to Foss. The manila envelope was the worst. Cecily Opsel said, there is a psychologist in Briarton. His name is not important right now because he is not the problem. The problem is that Sutton scheduled an appointment with him in August, presenting himself as a concerned family member seeking guidance on evaluating a parent's cognitive fitness. He described a series of incidents involving you, incidents you apparently shared with him over the past year. The psychologist gave him a referral checklist and told him that a formal assessment would require your participation and consent. Cecily paused. What Sutton did with that referral checklist was send it to Dara Kellum, who used it to draft a supporting document suggesting that a preemptive capacity review might be necessary given the documented incidents. Hall said, that document is in the folder he gave you? I thought about Section 11, the one I had read 3 times and understood as standard protective language. I opened the copy I had brought to the table and found it. The language was there. Buried inside a paragraph about trustee succession and administrative review, a single sentence. In the event of questions regarding the grantor's capacity to revoke this instrument, the parties agree that assessment documentation on file shall constitute prima facie evidence for the purposes of any subsequent review. Hall set down the folder. They were going to use your own words about your own grief against you. The room was quiet. I thought about the woman in Knox County whose family had contested and lost. I thought about the 4 families for her. I thought about whoever came after me if no one stopped the pattern. I want to reschedule the signing, I said. I want to call Sutton and tell him my back is better. Tell him I'm ready. Hal looked at me. And when they arrive, I want to finish it, I said. I spent the evening before making the house very clean. I cooked the chicken and dumplings that Wendell had made every Sunday of our married life, the recipe his mother had given him and that he had given me, written in his handwriting on a card kept in the recipe box. The smell of it filled the house the way it had filled it for decades, and I let myself stand in it. Roberta arrived at noon. My neighbor Clarence, who had been a county judge for 20 years before he retired and who was the most careful man I had ever known, arrived at 12:30. Hal was already there with a colleague. Cecily sat in the chair by the window. At 2:45 I heard tires in the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window. Sutton came up the front walk with a leather portfolio under his arm. Celeste was beside him, wearing her blue kellum, her hair back. Gerald Foss came last, carrying a flat case. I opened the door. Sutton smiled. You look well. The back better? Much better, I said. Come in. I made dumplings. Celeste hugged me. She smelled like the shampoo she had used since she was 17. She said, Mom, the house looks beautiful. I looked at my daughter's face. She did not know. I had been certain of it, and now I was more certain. She thought this was a routine afternoon. She thought she was here to witness a signature. I led them to the dining room. Roberta and Clarence and Hal's colleague were already seated along the far wall. Sutton's eyes moved across the room once, quickly, and then composed themselves. Dara Kellum's expression did not change. She had prepared for complications. Gerald Foss stopped in the doorway, and then corrected himself to my actual name. I don't think we've met some of your guests. Not yet. I sat at the head of the table. I folded my hands. Before we start, Sutton said, settling into his chair with the ease of someone who had rehearsed confidence, I'd like to walk everyone through the documents one final time, just to make sure we're all comfortable. I'd like to say something first, I said. Of course. I looked at my daughter. Her face was open and patient in the way it had always been, the way it had been when she was a girl and I was explaining something she was working to understand. 40 years ago, I said, your father and I drove to Cloverfield in a truck that broke down twice on the highway. We had $400 and a mattress and a cast iron skillet. And your father said to me, standing on the side of Route 11 with steam coming out of the hood, he said, Bonnie, everything is fixable as long as we do it together. I paused. I have tried to do that, everything 2 years. And then alone, and I'm still trying. For 42 years his eyes had gone so soft. Last month, I said. I found language in Section 7 of this document. I turned the folder to face the tape. A management fee of 3% annually on all assets under power of attorney. On my assets, that is approximately $22,000 per year paid to Sutton. He did not explain this in our meetings. Neither did Miss Kellum, who drafted the document. I looked at Dara Kellum. And neither did you tell me that you were the one who drafted it. Sutton started to speak. There is also a clause, I continued, in Section 11 that references assessments documentation on file. That documentation does not exist as medical record. It exists as a supporting document drafted by Ms. Kellum using information Sutton collected from my private conversations about my own grief. It was designed to be used against me if I attempted to revoke this agreement. Celeste turned to look at her husband. I want to tell you about Gerald Foss, I said, and looked at the man in the doorway. He had not sat down. He was doing a calculation with his eyes. Mr. Foss notarized documents in a 2020 arrangement in Knox County that resulted in the transfer of a widow's assets into a management structure she did not fully understand. She died the following year. He has done this at least 4 times. Hal opened the first folder and turned it to face the table. Sutton said, this is a mischaracterization of a straightforward estate planning process, Clarence said from his chair by the wall in the voice of a man who had heard 40 years of arguments in his courtroom. Mr. Graff, I would strongly recommend not speaking right now. The room went very quiet. Hal said, Dara Kellum, you left your previous firm in Nashville under circumstances involving questions about client document irregularities. You have since engaged as a consultant for at least 3 similar arrangements, all involving women over 65, all involving undisclosed fee structures placed in embedded subsections of documents presented as protective instruments. Dara Kellum's face was still. Celeste said, Sutton. Her voice was not loud. It was the voice of a woman asking a question she already knows the answer to and needs to hear confirmed anyway. He looked at her. His portfolio was unopened on the table in front of him. I was trying to take care of your mother, he said. She has been struggling. You know she's been struggling. She's sitting at the head of the table, Celeste said, explaining Section 11 of a legal document. Does she look like she needs taking care of? He had no answer for that. I looked at my son-in-law. He was 47 years old. He was not a cruel man. I did not think he had begun this with cruelty in mind. I thought he had begun it the way most people begin things that go wrong, slowly, with a small convenience and a ready justification and someone alongside him who was better at this than he was. 2 officers from the Cloverfield Police Department are currently outside, Hal said. Gerald Foss and Dara Kellum. You are being referred to the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance and the District Attorney's Office for investigation of financial elder abuse and document fraud. He looked at his notes. Sutton Graff, your involvement is under active review. Gerald Foss left without looking at anyone. He made himself very small on the way out. Dara Kellum picked up her bag. She looked at Sutton once, a particular kind of look, appraising, and something colder underneath it. Then she walked out. Sutton sat. After the officers left, and Hal and his colleague had gathered their documents, and Roberta had put on coffee and Clarence had quietly said his goodbyes, the 3 of us were alone in the dining room. The chicken and dumplings were still on the stove. The October light through the window had shifted to the long flat gold of late afternoon. Sutton said, Celeste, I want you to know that I thought. Not yet, she said. She was looking at the table. I'm not ready to hear it yet. He nodded. She looked at me. Mom, are you all right? Yes, I said. She reached across the corner of the table and put her hand over mine. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Later, after Sutton had left and Celeste had stayed another 2 hours, after we had eaten together at the table that 4 hours earlier had been arranged like a verdict, she sat with her coat on and her hands around a mug of tea and said, I didn't see it. I was so close to it and I didn't see it. You trusted your husband. I stopped paying attention to you, she said. After Dad died, I let Sutton take over the practical things because I didn't know what to do with how much I missed Dad, and it was easier to have Sutton manage things than to sit with you in the not knowing. She looked at the mug. I made you into a problem to be solved because it was easier than making you a person to grieve with. I looked at my daughter, 53 years old, her father's forehead and her father's habit of telling the truth sideways when the direct version is too heavy. Then let's grieve together, I said. It's not too late for that. She stayed until 9. When she left, I stood at the front door and watched her headlights back out of the driveway and turn toward Briarton, and then I went inside and washed the dishes and put away the leftovers and turned off the kitchen light. In the weeks that followed, the case moved the way these things move. Slowly, in documents, in filings I was not always shown but was always informed about. Gerald Foss surrendered his notary commission in December while the investigation was ongoing. Dara Kellum was named in a civil complaint by 2 other women whose arrangements she had structured. Women's Silly's investigation had identified. A woman in Memphis, a woman in Johnson City, neither of them people I had ever met. Both of them women who had been careful and smart and alone at the wrong moment. I underwent a voluntary cognitive evaluation in November at the neurology clinic at the University of Tennessee Medical Center, conducted over 2 days by a physician I found and contacted myself. Her report was clear and unambiguous. No evidence of cognitive impairment. Memory, executive function, and reasoning all within normal range for my age group. She noted that my score on the verbal recall portion was in the 92nd percentile. I had the report laminated, not because I needed reminding, because on the days when grief still arrived without warning and made me feel uncertain and slow and older than I was, I wanted something concrete to hold on to evidence in the language I had always trusted that wondering was not the same as diminishing. Celeste called every day for 2 months, then every other day, and then on a schedule that was ours rather than obligation. Sutton moved out of their house in November. He did not contest much. I learned this from Celeste in short, careful conversations that were gradually becoming less careful. One Sunday in December she came and we drove out to the cemetery together. The oaks had been bare for weeks and the ground was hard and the sky was that flat white that Tennessee does in winter. We stood at Wendell's grave for a long time without talking. Then Celeste said, I keep thinking about what Dad would have done if it had been the other way around and someone had tried to take something from you. He would have been calm about it, I said, and then thorough. She almost smiled. Yeah, that's accurate. We drove home on the long route and she came inside and we made cornbread from the recipe that lived on the same card as the dumpling in Wendell's handwriting, and we ate it at the kitchen table while the afternoon went dark outside, and neither of us said much, but it was the kind of not saying much that comes from being close to someone rather than far away from them. I had spent 14 months closing the door. I understood now why I had done it. Grief had made me want to be competent and contained, because competence was the thing I knew how to perform when nothing else was within my control. I had closed the door and Sutton had watched it close and seen an opening. That is the thing about the people who do what he and Dara Kellum did. They need a door standing open just a little. Sometimes that door is opened by loneliness or age or the ordinary confusion of loss. Sometimes it is opened by the people who love us when they stop talking to us honestly, because honesty requires sitting with something they would rather fix. The door is always in the end made out of silence between two people who should be speaking. I know what I would tell you if you came and sat at my kitchen table. I would make coffee and I would say, stay in contact with the people who knew you before. Let them see your documents before you sign them. Ask the questions that feel too small or too suspicious to ask, because those are usually the right questions. And if someone tells you they are protecting you from your own life, ask them to show you exactly which part of your life they think you can no longer be trusted with. I am 68 years old. I worked 31 years in a hospital. I raised a daughter who, when she needed to, sat across a table from her husband and asked him a question she already knew the answer to. I buried a man I loved for 42 years and I got up the morning after and made coffee, and I have made it every morning since. Nobody gets to decide I am finished, not without my signature on something I have read very carefully first.